Imagine a world where names are dangerous, bicycles hold the secrets of the universe, and eternity loops like a broken clock. Flann O'Brien's The Third Policeman pulls us into a nightmare of absurdity where murder leads not to judgment, but to a hell of philosophical riddles. Tonight we meet a nameless man whose quest for knowledge unlocks doors better left closed. Welcome, listeners, to a tale where reality bends and breaks. Our story begins with a scholar obsessed with the mad philosopher Selby, whose theories claim night is black air and houses are illusion. But obsession turns deadly, and our narrator finds himself in a world where policemen guard stranger truths. Not everybody knows how I killed old Philip Mathers, smashing his jaw in with my spade, but first it's better to speak of my friendship with John Divney, because it was he who first knocked old Mathers down by giving him a great blow in the neck with a special bicycle pump, which he manufactured himself out of a hollow iron bar. Divney was a strong civil man, but he was lazy and idle-minded. He was personally responsible for the whole idea in the first place. It was he who told me to bring my spade. It was he who gave the orders on the occasion and also the explanations when they were called for. I was born a long time ago. My father was a strong farmer, and my mother owned a public house. We all lived in the public house, but it was not a strong house at all and was closed most of the day because my father was out at work on the farm and my mother was always in the kitchen, and for some reason the customers never came until it was nearly bedtime, and well after it at Christmas time and on other unusual days like that. I never saw my mother outside the kitchen in my life, and I never saw a customer during the day and even at night, and I never saw more than two or three together. But then I was in bed part of the time, and it is possible that things happened differently with my mother and with the customers late at night. My father I do not remember well, but he was a strong man and did not talk much except on Saturdays, when he would mention Parnell with the customers and say that Ireland was a queer country. My mother I can recall perfectly. Her face was always red and sore-looking from bending at the fire. She spoke her life making tea to pass the time and singing snatches of old songs to pass the meantime. I knew her well, but my father and I were strangers, and I did not converse much. Often, indeed, when I would be studying in the kitchen at night, I could hear him through the thin door to the shop, talking there from his seat under the oil lamp for hours on end to Mick the sheepdog. Always it was only the drone of his voice I heard, never the separate bits of words. He was a man who understood all dogs thoroughly and treated them like human beings. My mother owned a cat, but it was a foreign outdoor animal and was rarely seen, and my mother never took any notice of it. We were all happy enough in a queer separate way. Then a certain year came about in the Christmas time, and when the year was gone, my father and mother were gone also. Mick the sheepdog was very tired and sad after my father went, and would not do his work with the sheep at all. He, too, went the next year. I was young and foolish at the time, and did not know properly why these people had all left me, where they had gone, and why they did not give explanations beforehand. My mother was the first to go, and I can remember a fat man with a red face and black suit telling my father there was no doubt where she was, that he could be sure of that as he could of anything else in his vale of tears. But he did not mention where, and as I thought the whole thing was very private, and that she might be back on Wednesday, I did not ask him where. Later, when my father went, I thought he had gone to fetch her with an outside car, but when neither of them came back on the next Wednesday, I felt sorry and disappointed. The man in the black suit was back again. He stayed in the house for 2 nights and was continually washing his hands in the bedroom and reading books. There were two other men, one a small pale man and one a tall black man in leggings. They had pockets full of pennies, and they gave me one every time I asked them questions. I can remember the tall man in the leggings saying to the other man, "The poor misfortunate little bastard." I did not understand this at the time, and thought that they were talking about the other man in the black clothes who was always working at the washstand in the Che bedroom. But I understood it all clearly afterwards. After a few days, I was brought away myself on an outside car and sent to a strange school. It was a boarding school filled with people I did not know, some young and some older. I soon got to know that it was a good school and a very expensive one, but I did not pay over any money to the people who were in charge of it because I had not any. All this and a lot more I understood clearly later. My life at this school does not matter except for one thing. I was here that I first came to know something of de Selby. One day I picked up idly an old tattered book in the science master's study and put it in my pocket to read in bed the next morning, as I had just earned the privilege of lying late. I was about 16 then, and the date was the 17th of March. I can still think that day is the most important in my life, and I can remember it more readily than I do my birthday. The book was the first edition of Golden Hours with the last 2 pages missing. By the time I was 19 and had reached the end of my education, I knew that the book was valuable and that in keeping it I was stealing it. Nevertheless, I packed it in my bag without a qualm, and would probably do the same if I had my time again. Perhaps it is important in the story that I'm going to tell that to remember that it was for Selby I committed my first serious sin. It is for him that I committed my greatest sin. I had long since got to know how I was situated in the world. All my people were dead, and there was a man called Dibney working the farm and living on it until I should return. He did not own any of it, and was given weekly checks of pay by an office full of solicitors in a town far away. I had never met these solicitors, and never met Dibney, but they were all really working for me and my father, who had paid in cash for these arrangements before he died. When I was younger, I thought he was a generous man to do that for a boy he did not know well. I did not go home direct from school. I spent some months in other places broadening my mind and finding out what a complete edition of Selby's works would cost me, and whether some of the less important of his commentators' books could be gotten on loan. In one of the places where I was broadening my mind, I met one night with a bad accident. I broke my left leg, or if you like, it was broken for me, in 6 places, and when I was well enough again to go my way, I had one leg made of wood, the left one. I knew that I had only a little money, that I was going home to a rocky farm, and that my life would not be easy. But I was certain by this time that farming, even if I had to do it, would not be my life work. I knew that if my name was to be remembered, I would be remembered with the Selbys. I can recall in every detail the evening I walked back into my own house with a traveling bag in each hand. I was 20 years of age. It was an evening in happy yellow summer, and door of public house was open. Behind the counter was John Dibney, leaning forward on the low-down powder dashboard with his fork, his arms neatly folded, and his face looking down on a newspaper which spread upon the counter. He had brown hair and was made handsomely enough in a small buddy way. His shoulders were broadened out with work, and his arms were thick like little tree trunks. He had quite civil face, with eyes like cow's eyes, brooding, brown, and patient. When he knew that somebody had come in, he did not stop his reading, but his left hand strayed out and found a rag and began to give the counter slow, damp swipes. Then, still reading, he moved his hands one above the other as if he was drawing out a concertina to full length and said, "A schooner?" The schooner was what the customers called a pint of Coleraine blackjack. It was the cheapest porter in the world. I say that I wanted my dinner and mentioned my name and station. Then we closed the shop and went into the kitchen, and we were there nearly all night, eating and talking and drinking whiskey. The next day was Thursday. John Dibney said that his work was now done and that he was ready to go home to where his people were on Saturday. It was not true to say that his work was done, because the farm was in a poor way and most of the year's work had not even been started. But on Saturday he said there were a few things to finish and that he could not work on Sunday, but that he would be in a position to hand over the place in perfect order on Tuesday evening. On Monday he had a sick pig to mind, and that delayed him. At the end of the week he was busier than ever, and at the passing of another 2 months did not seem to lighten or reduce his urgent tasks. I did not mind much, because if he was idle-minded and a sparing worker, he was satisfactory so far as company was concerned, and he never asked for pay. I did little work about the place myself, spending all my time arranging my papers and rereading still more closely the pages of De Selby. A full year had not passed when I noticed that Dibney was using the word "we" in his conversation, and worse than that, the word "our." He said that the place was not everything that it might be, and talked of getting a hired man. I did not agree with this, and told him so, saying that there was no necessity for more than 2 men on a small farm, and adding, most unhappily for myself, that we were poor. After that it was useless trying to tell him that it was I who owned everything. I began to tell myself that even if I did own everything, he owned me. 4 years passed away happily enough for each of us. We had a good house and plenty of good country food, but little money. Nearly all my time was spent in study. Out of my savings, I had now bought the complete works of 2 principal commentators, Hackjaw and Bassett, and a photostat of the De Selby Codex. I had also embarked upon the task of learning French and German thoroughly in order to read the works of other commentators in those languages. Dibney had been working after a fashion on the farm by day, and talking loudly in the public house by night, and serving drinks there. Once I asked him about the public house, and he said he was losing money on it every day. I did not understand this because the customers, judging by their voices through the thin door, were plentiful enough, and Divney was continually buying himself suits of clothes and fancy tie pins. But I did not say much. I was satisfied to be left in peace because I knew that my own work was more important than myself. One day in early winter, Divney said to me, "I cannot lose very much more of my own money on that bar. The customers are complaining about the porter. It's very bad porter because I have to drink a little now and again myself to keep them company, and I do not feel well in my health over the head of it. I will have to go away for 2 days and do some traveling and see if there's a better brand of porter to be had." He disappeared the next morning on his bicycle, and when he came back very dusty and travel-worn at the end of 3 days, he told me that everything was all right and that 4 barrels of better porter could be expected on Friday. It came punctually on that day and was well bought by the customers in the public house that night. It was manufactured in some town in the south and was known as the Wrastler. If you drank 3 or 4 pints of it, it was nearly bound to win. The customers praised it highly, and when they had it inside them, they sang and shouted, and sometimes lay down on the floor on the roadway outside in a great stupor. Some of them complained afterwards that they'd been robbed while in this state, and talked angrily in the shop the next night about stolen money and gold watches which had disappeared off their strong chains. John Divney did not say much on the subject to them, and did not mention it to me at all. He printed the words, "Beware of pickpockets," in large letters on a card, and hung it on the back of shelves beside another notice that dealt with checks. Nevertheless, a week rarely passed without some customer complaining after an evening with the Wrastler. It was not a satisfactory thing. As time went on, Divney became more and more despondent about what he called the bar. He said that he would be satisfied if it was paid his way, but he doubted seriously if it ever would. The government were partially responsible for the situation owing to the high taxes. He did not think that he could continue to bear the burden of the loss without some assistance. I said that my father had some old-fashioned way of management which made possible a profit, but that the shop should be closed if now continuing to lose money. Divney only said that it was a very serious thing to surrender a license. It was about this time, when I was nearing 30, that Divney and I began to get the name of being great friends. For years before that I had rarely gone out at all. This was because I was so busy with my work that I hardly ever had the time. Also, my wooden leg was not very good for walking with it. This something very unusual happened to change all this, and after it happened, Divney and I never parted company for more than 1 minute either night or day. All day I was out with him on the farm, and at night I sat on my father's old seat under the lamp in the corner of the public house, doing what work I could with the papers in the middle of the blare and crush and the hot noises which went away with the Wrastler. If Divney went for a walk on Sunday to a neighbor's house, I went with him and came home with him again, never before or after him. If he went away to a town on his bicycle to order porter or seed potatoes, or even to see a certain party, I went on my own bicycle beside him. I brought my bed into his room and took the trouble to sleep only when he was sleeping and to be wide awake a good hour before he stirred. Once I nearly failed in my watchfulness. I remember waking up with a start in the small hours of black night and finding him quietly dressing himself in the dark. I asked him where he was going, and he said he could not sleep and that he thought a walk would do him good. I said I was in the same condition myself, and the two of us went for a walk together in the coldest and wettest night I ever experienced. When we returned drenched, I said it was foolish for us to sleep in different beds in such bitter weather, and got into his bed beside him. He did not say much then or at any other time. I slept with him always after that. We were friendly and smiled at each other, but the situation was a queer one, and neither of us liked it. The neighbors were not long noticing how insufferable we were. We had been in that condition of being always together for nearly 3 years, and they said that we were the best two Christians in all Ireland. They said that human friendship was a beautiful thing, and that Divney and I were the noble example of it in our history of the world. If other people fell out or fought or disagreed, they were asked why, and they could not be like me and Divney. It would have been a great shock for everybody if Divney had appeared in any place at any time without myself beside him. And it is not strange that two people never came to dislike each other as bitterly as did I and Divney. And two people were never so polite to each other, so friendly in the face. I must go back several years to explain what happened, to bring about this peculiar situation. A certain party, whom Divney went to visit once a month, was a girl called Pegan Mears. For my part, I had completed my definitive de Selby index, wherein the views of all known commentators on every aspect of the savant and his work had been collated. Each of us, therefore, had a large thing on the mind. One day, Dibney said to me, "That is a powerful book you've written, I don't doubt." It is useful, I admitted, and badly wanted. In fact, it contained much of that was entirely new, and proof that many opinions widely held about the Selby and his theories were misconceptions based on misreadings of his works. It might make your name in the world and your golden fortune and copyrights. It might. Then why did you not put it out? I explained that money is required to put out a book of this kind unless the writer already has a reputation. He gave me a look of sympathy that was not usual with him and sighed. Money is hard to come by these days. With the drink trade on its last legs and the land state is starved away to nothing for the want of artificial manures that can't be got for love and money, owing to the trickery of Jewmen and the Freemasons. I knew that it was not true about the manures. He had already pretended to me that they could not be got because he did not want the trouble of them. After a pause, he said, "We will have to see what we can do about getting money for your book, and indeed I am in need of some myself, because you can't expect a girl to wait until she's too old to wait any longer." I did not know whether he meant to bring a wife, if he got one, into the house. If he did, and I could not stop him, then I would have to leave. On the other hand, if marriage meant that he himself would leave, I think he'd be very glad of it. In some days before he talked on the subject of money again. Then he said, "What about old Mathers?" "What about him?" I'd never seen the old man, but knew all about him. He'd spent a long life of 50 years in the cattle trade, and now lived in retirement in a big house 3 miles away. He still did large business through agents, and the people said that he carried no less than 3,000 pounds with him every time he hobbled to the village to lodge his money. Little as I knew of social proprieties at the time, I would not dream of asking him for assistance. "He is worth a packet of potato meal," Divney said. "I do not think we should look for charity," I answered. "I do not think so either." He was a proud man in his own way, I thought, and no more was said just then. But after that he took to the habit of putting occasionally into conversations on other subjects some irrelevant remark about our need for money and our amount of it which Mathers carried in his black cash box. Sometimes he would revile the old man, accusing him of being in the artificial manure ring, or being dishonest in his business dealings. Once he said something about social justice, but it was plain to me that he did not properly understand the term. I do not know exactly how or when it became clear to me that Dibney, far from seeking charity, intended to rob Mathers, and I cannot recollect how long it took me to realize that he meant to kill him as well, in order to avoid the possibility of being identified as the robber afterwards. I only know that within 6 months I had come to accept this grim plan as a commonplace of our conversation. 3 further months passed before I could bring myself to agree to the proposal, and 3 months more before I openly admitted to Dibney that my misgivings were at an end. I cannot recount the tricks and wiles he used to win me to his side. It is sufficient to say that he read portions of my De Selby Index, or pretended to, and discussed with me afterwards the serious responsibility of any persons who declined by mere reason of personal whim to give the index to the world. Old Mathers lived alone. Dibney knew on what evening and what deserted stretch of road near his house we would meet him with his box of money. The evening, when it came, was in depth of winter. The light was already waning as we sat at our dinner discussing the business we had in hand. Dibney said that we could bring our spades tied on the crossbar of our bicycles, when this would make us look like men out for rabbits, but he would bring his own iron pump in case we should get a slow puncture. There is little to tell about the murder. The lowering skies seemed to conspire with us, coming down in a shroud of dreary mist to within a few yards of the wet road where we were raiding. Everything was still, with no sound in our ears except the dripping of the trees. Our bicycles were hidden. I was leaning miserably on my spade, and Divney his iron pump under his arm, smoking his pipe contentedly. The old man was upon us almost before we realized there was anybody near. I could not see him well in the dim light, but I could glimpse a spent, bloodless face peering from the top of the great black coat which covered him from ear to ankle. Dibney went forward at once, and pointing back along the road, said, "Would that be your parcel on the road?" The old man turned his head to look, and received a blow on the back of the neck from Dibney's pump, which knocked him clean off his feet and probably smashed his neck bone. As he collapsed full length in the mud, he did not cry out. Instead, I heard him say something softly in conversational tone, something like, "I do not care for celery," or "I left my glasses in the scullery." Then he lay very still. I had been watching the scene rather stupidly, still leaning on my spade. Dibney was rummaging savagely at the fallen figure, then stood up. He had a black cash box in his hand. He waved it in the air and roared at me. Here, wake up! Finish him with the spade! I went forward mechanically, swung the spade over my shoulder, and smashed the blade of it with all my strength against the protruding chin. I felt and almost heard the fabric of his skull crumple up crisply like an empty eggshell. I do not know how often I struck him after that, but I did not stop until I was tired. I threw the spade down and looked around for Dibney. He was nowhere to be seen. I called his name softly, but he did not answer. I walked a little bit up the road and called again. I jumped on the rising of a ditch and peered around into the gathering dusk. I called his name once more as loudly as I dared, but there was no answer in the stillness. He was gone. He had made off with a box of money, leaving me alone with the dead man and a spade which was now probably tingling the watery mud around it with weak pet and pink stain. My heart stumbled painfully in its beating. A chill of fright ran through me. If anybody should come, nothing in the world would save me from the gallows. If Dibney was with me still to share my guilt, even that would not protect me. Numb with fear, I stood for a long time looking at the crumpled heap in the black coat. Before the old man had come, Dibney and I had dug a deep hole in the field beside the road, taking care to preserve the sods of grass. Now, in a panic, I dragged the heavy, sodden figure from where it lay and got it with tremendous effort across the ditch into the field and slumped it down into the hole. Then I rushed back for my spade and started to throw and push the earth back into the hole in a mad, blind fury. The hole was nearly full when I heard steps. Looking around in great dismay, I saw the unmistakable shape of Dibney making his way carefully across the ditch into the field. When I came up, I pointed dumbly to the hole with my spade. Without a word, he went to where our bicycles were, came back with his own spade, and worked steadily with me until the task was finished. We did everything possible to hide any trace of what had happened. Then we cleaned our boots with grass, tied the spades, and walked home. A few people who came against us on the road bade us good evening in the dark. I'm sure they took us for two tired laborers making for home after a hard day's work. They were not far wrong. On our way, I said to Dibney, where were you that time? Attending an important business, he answered. I thought he was referring to a certain thing and said, surely you could have kept it until after. It's not what you were thinking of, he answered. Have you got the box? He turned his face to me this time, screwed it up, and put a ringer on his lips. Not so loud. It's in a safe place. But where? The only reply he gave me was to put the finger on his lips more firmly and make a long hissing noise. He gave me to understand that mentioning the box even in a whisper was the most foolish and reckless thing it was possible for me to do. When we reached home, he went away and washed himself and put on one of several blue Sunday suits he had. When he came back to where I was sitting, a miserable figure at the kitchen fire, he came across to me with a very serious face, pointed to the window, and cried, Would that be your parcel on the road? Then he let out a bellow of laughter, which seemed to loosen up his whole body, turn his eyes to water in his head, and shake the whole house. When he had finished, he wiped the tears from his face, walked in the shop, and made a noise which could only be made by taking the cork quickly out of a whiskey bottle. In the weeks which followed, I asked him where the box was 100 times in 1,000 different ways. He never answered in the same way, but the answer was always the same. It was in a very safe place. The least said about it, the better, until things quieted down. One was the word. It would be found in all good time. For the purpose of safe-keeping the place, it was superior to the Bank of England. There was a good time coming. It would be pity to spoil everything by hastiness or impatience. And that is why John Dibney and I became inseparable friends, and why I never allowed him to leave my sight for 3 years. Having robbed me in my own public house, having even robbed my customers, and having ruined my farm, I knew that he was sufficiently dishonest to steal my share of Mather's money and make off with the box if given the opportunity. I knew there was no possible necessity for waiting until things quieted down, because very little notice was taken of the old man's disappearance. People said he was a queer, mean man, and that going away without telling anybody or leaving his address was the sort of thing he would do. I think I have said before the peculiar terms of physical intimacy upon which myself and Dibney found ourselves had become more and more intolerable. In the latter months I had hoped to force him to capitulate by making my company unbearably close and unrelenting, but at the same time I took to carrying a small pistol in case of accidents. One Sunday night, when both of us were sitting in the kitchen, both incidentally on the same side of the fire, he took his pipe from his mouth and turned to me. Do you know, I think things have quieted down. I only gave a grunt. Do you get my meaning? Things were never any other way, I asked shortly. He looked at me in a superior way. I know a lot about these things, and you would be surprised at the pitfalls a man will make if he's in too big a hurry. Cannot be too careful, but all at the same time, I think things have quieted down enough to make it safe. I'm glad you think so. There are good times coming. I will get the box tomorrow, and then we'll divide the money right here on this table. We will get the box, I answered, saying the first word with great care. He gave me a long, hurt look and asked me sadly did I not trust him. I replied that both of us should finish what we both had started. All right, he said in a very vexed way. I am sorry you don't trust me after all the work I have done to try to put this place right, but to show you the sort I am, I will let you get the box yourself. I will tell you where it is tomorrow. I took care to sleep with him as usual that night. The next morning he was in better temper and told me with great simplicity the box was hidden in Mather's own empty house under the floorboards of the first room on the right from the hall. Are you sure? I asked. I swear it, he said solemnly, raising his hand to heaven. I thought the position over for a moment, examining the possibility that it was a ruse to part company with me at last and then make off himself to the real hiding place. But his face for the first time seemed to wear a look of honesty. I'm sorry if I injured your feelings last night, I said, but to show that there's no ill feeling, I'd be glad if you would come with me at least part of the way. I honestly think that both of us should finish what the two of us started. All right, he said. It's all the same, but I would like you to get the box with your own hands, because it's only simple justice after not telling you where it was. As my own bicycle was punctured, we walked the distance. When we were about 500 yards from Mather's house, Dibney stopped by a little wall and said he was going to sit on it and smoke his pipe and wait for me. Let you go along and get the box and bring it back here. There are good times coming, and we will be rich men tonight. It's sitting under a loose board in the floor of the first room on the right, in the corner foremost to the bed. Perched as he was on the wall, I knew he need never leave my sight. In the brief time I would be away, I could see him any time I turned my head. I'll be back in 10 minutes, I said. Good man, but remember this. If you meet anybody, you don't know what you're looking for. You don't know in whose house you are. You don't know anything. I don't even know my own name. This was a very remarkable thing for me to say, because the next time I was asked my name, I could not answer. I did not know. 2. The Selby has some interesting things to say on the subject of houses. A row of houses he regards as a row of necessary evils. The softening and degeneration of the human race he attributes to the progressive predilection for interiors and waning interest in the art of going out and staying there. This, in turn, he sees as a result of the rise of such pursuits as reading, chess-playing, drinking, marriage, and the like, few of which can be satisfactorily conducted in the open. Elsewhere, he defines a house as a large coffin, a warren, and a box. Evidently, his main objection was to the confinement of a roof and four walls. He ascribed somewhat far-fetched the therapeutic values, chiefly pulmonary, to certain structures of his own design which he called habitats, crude drawings of which may still be seen in the pages of the country album. These structures were of two kinds, roofless houses and houses without walls. The former had wide open doors and windows with an extremely ungainly superstructure of tarpaulins loosely rolled on spars against bad weather, the whole looking like a foundering sailing ship erected on a platform of masonry, and the last place where one would think of keeping even cattle. The other type of habitat had the conventional slated roof but no walls save one, which was to be erected in the corner of the prevailing wind. Around the other sides were the inevitable tarpaulins loosely wound on rollers suspended from the gutters of the roof, the whole structure being surrounded by a diminutive moat or pit bearing some resemblance to military latrines. In the light of present-day theories of housing and hygiene, there can be no doubt that de Selby was much mistaken in these ideas, but in his own remote day more than one sick person lost his life in an ill-advised quest for health in these fantastic dwellings. Golden Hours, 261 Country Album, page 1034, the Fournier, the reliable French commentator in de Selby, in Nameless d'un Occidental, has put forward a curious theory regarding my recollections of de Selby were prompted by my visit to the house of old Mr. Mathers. As I approached it along the road, the house appeared to be a fine, roomy brick building of uncertain age, 2 stories high, with a plain porch and 8 or 9 windows to the front of each floor. I must halt there. That last little line of Ignen d'un Occidente. Apparently, this is a side note from the author himself. So, going forward, I'll try to remember that. I opened the iron gate and walked as softly as I could up the weed-tufted gravel drive. My mind was strangely empty. I did not feel that I was about to end successfully a plan I had working unrelentingly at night and day for 3 years. I felt no glow of pleasure and was unexcited at the prospect of becoming rich. I was occupied only with the mechanical task of finding a black box. The hall door was closed, and although it was set far back in a very deep porch, the wind and rain had whipped a coating of gritty dust against the panels and deep into the crack where the door opened, showing that it had been shut for years. Standing on a derelict flower bed, I tried to push up the sash of the first window on the left. It yielded to my strength, raspingly and stubbornly. I clambered through the opening and found myself, not at once in a room, but crawling along the deepest window ledge I'd ever seen. When I reached the floor, I jumped noisily down upon it. The open window seemed very far away and much too small to have admitted me. The room where I found myself was thick with dust, musty and deserted of all furniture. Spiders had erected great stretchings of their webs about the fireplace. I made my way quickly to the hall, threw open the door of the room where the box was, and paused on the threshold. It was a dark morning, and the weather had stained the windows with blears of gray wash which kept the brightest part of the weak light from coming in. In the far corner of the room was a blur of shadow. I had a sudden urge to have done with my task and been out of this house forever. I walked across the bare boards, knelt down in the corner, and passed my hands about the floor in search of a loose board. To my surprise, I found it easily. It was about 2 feet in length and rocked hollowly under my hand. I lifted it up, laid it aside, struck a match. I saw a black metal cash box nestled dimly in the hole. I put my hand down and crooked a finger in the loose reclining handle, but the match suddenly flicked and went out, and the handle of the box, which I had lifted up about an inch, slid heavily off my finger. Without stopping to light another match, I thrust my hand bodily into the opening, and just when it should be closing about the box, something happened. Before that, De Selby notes these habitats. He suggests that De Selby, when writing the album, paused to consider some point of difficulty, and in the meantime engaged in the absent-minded practice known as generally as doodling, then put his manuscript away. The next time he took it up, he was confronted with a mass of diagrams and drawings which he took to be the plans of a type of dwelling he always had in mind, and immediately wrote many pages explaining the sketches. In no other way, adds the severe Lafournier, can one explain so regrettably a lapse. I cannot hope to describe what it was, but it had frightened me very much long before I had understood it even slightly. It was some change which had come upon me or upon the room, indescribably subtle, yet monumentous, ineffable. It was as if the daylight had changed with unnatural suddenness, as if the temperatures of the evening had altered greatly in an instant, or as if the air had become twice as rare or twice as dense as it had been in the winking of an eye. Perhaps all of these and all things happened together, for all my senses were bewildered all at once and could give me no explanation. The ringers of my right hand, thrust into the opening in the floor, had closed mechanically, found nothing at all, and came up again empty. The box was gone. I heard a cough behind me, soft and natural, yet more disturbing than any sound I could ever come upon the human ear. That I did not die of fright was due, I think, to two things: the fact that my senses were already disarranged, and able to interpret to me only gradually what they had perceived, and also the fact that the utterance of the cough seemed to bring with it some more awful alteration in everything, just as if it had held the universe stand still for an instant, suspending the planets in their courses, halting the sun, and holding in mid-air any failing the thing the earth was pulling towards it. I collapsed weakly from my kneeling backwards into a limp sitting down upon the floor. Sweat broke upon my brow, and my eyes remained open for a long time without a wink, glazed and almost sightless. In the darkest corner of the room, near the window, a man was sitting in a chair, eyeing me with a mild but unwavering interest. His hand crept out across a small table by his side to turn out very slow an oil lamp which was standing on it. The oil lamp had a glass bowl with a wick dimly visible inside it, curling in convolutions like an intestine. There were tea things on the table. The man was old Mathers. He was watching me in silence. He did not move or speak, and he might have been still dead save for the slight movement of his hand at the lamp, the very gentle screwing of his thumb and forefinger against the wick wheel. The hand was yellow, the wrinkled skin draped loosely upon his bones. Over the knuckle of his forefinger I could clearly see the loop of a skinny vein. It is hard to write of such a scene or to convey with known words the feelings which came knocking at my numbed mind. How long we sat there, for instance, looking at one another, I do not know. Years or minutes could be swallowed up by equal ease in that indescribable and unaccountable interval. The light of morning vanished from my sight, the dusty floor was like nothingness beneath me, and my whole body dissolved away, leaving me existing only in the stupid, spellbound gaze that went steadily from where I was to the other corner. I remember that I noticed several things in a cold, mechanical way, as if I was sitting there with no worry, save to know everything I saw. His face was terrifying, but his eyes in the middle of it had a quality of chill and horror which made his other features look to me almost friendly. The skin was like faded parchment, with an arrangement of puckers and wrinkles which created between them an expression of fathomless inscrutability. The eyes were horrible. Looking at them, I got the feeling that they were not genuine eyes at all, but mechanical dummies, animated by electricity or the like, with a tiny pinhole in the center of the pupil, through which real eye gazed out secretively and with great coldness. Such a conception, possibly with no foundation at all in fact, disturbed me agonizingly, and gave rise to my mind in interminable speculations as to the color and quality of the real eye, and to whether indeed it was real at all, or merely another dummy with its pinhole on the same plane as the first one, so that the real eye, possibly behind thousands of these absurd disguises, gazed out through his barrel of serried peepholes. Occasionally the heavy cheese-like lids would drop down slowly with great languor and then rise again. Wrapped loosely around the body was an old wine-colored dressing gown. In my distress, I thought to myself that perhaps it was his twin brother, but at once I heard someone say, "Scarcely. If you look carefully at the left-hand side of his neck, you will notice there is a sticking plaster or a bandage there. His throat and chin are also bandaged." Forlornly I looked and saw that this was true. He was the man I had murdered beyond all question. He was sitting on a chair 4 yards away watching me. He sat stiffly without a move, as if afraid to hurt the gaping wounds which covered his body. Across my own shoulders the stiffness had spread from my exertions with the spade. But who had uttered these words? They had not frightened me. They were clearly audible to me, yet I knew they did not ring out across the air like the chilling cough of the old man in the chair. They came from deep inside me, from my soul. Never before had I believed or suspected that I had a soul, but just then I knew I had. I knew also that my soul was friendly, was my senior in years, and was solely concerned for my own welfare. For convenience I called him Joe. I felt a little reassured to know that I was not altogether alone. Joe was helping me. I will not try to tell the space of time which followed, in the terrible situation I found myself. My reason could give me no assistance. I knew that old Mathers had been felled by an iron bicycle pump, hacked to death with a heavy spade, and then secretly buried in a field. I knew also that the same man was now sitting in the same room with me, watching me in silence. His body was bandaged, but his eyes were alive, and so was his right hand, and so was all of him. Perhaps the murder by the roadside was a bad dream. "There is nothing dreamy about your stiff shoulders." "No," I replied, "but a nightmare can be strenuously physically a real thing." I decided in some crooked way that the best thing to do was to believe what my eyes were looking at rather than to place my trust in a memory. I decided to show unconcern, to talk to the old man, and test his own reality by asking about the black box which was responsible, if anything could be, for each of us being the way we were. I made up my mind to be bold, because I knew that it was in great danger. I knew that I would go mad unless I got up from the floor, and I moved and talked and behaved in an ordinary as a way as possible. I looked away from old Mathers, got carefully to my feet, and sat down in a chair that was not far away from him. Then I looked back at him, my heart pausing for a time, and working on again with slow, heavy hammer blows, which seemed to make my whole frame shudder. He remained perfectly still, but the live right hand gripped the pot of tea, raised it very awkwardly, and slapped a filling into the empty cup. His eyes had followed me to my new position, were now regarding me again with the same unwavering, languorous interest. Suddenly I began to talk. Words spilled out of me as if they were produced by machinery. My voice, tremulous at first, grew hard and loud and filled the whole room. I did not remember what I said at the beginning. I am sure that most of it was meaningless, but I was too pleased and reassured with the natural healthy noise of my tongue to be concerned about the words. Old Mathers did not move or say anything at first, but I was certain that he was listening to me. After a while he began to shake his head, and then I was sure he'd heard him say "no." I became excited at his responses and began to speak carefully. He negated my inquiry about his health, refused to say where the black box had gone, and even denied that it was dark morning. His voice had a peculiar jarring weight like the hoarse toll of an ancient rusty bell in an ivy-smothered tower. He had said nothing beyond the one word, no. His lips hardly moved. I felt sure he had no teeth behind them. Are you dead at present? I asked. I am not. Do you know where the box is? No. He made another violent movement with his right arm, slapping hot water into his teapot and pouring forth a little more of feeble brew into his cup. He relapsed into his attitude of motionless watching. I pondered for a time. Do you like weak tea? I asked. I do not, he said. Do you like tea at all? I asked. Strong or weak or halfway tea? No. Then why do you drink it? He shook his yellow face from side to side sadly and did not say anything. When he stopped shaking, he opened up his mouth and poured a cupful of tea in as one would pour a bucket of milk into a churn at churning time. Do you notice anything? No, I replied. Nothing beyond the eeriness of this house and the man who owns it. He is by no means the best conversationalist I have met. I found I spoke lightly enough. While speaking inwardly or outwardly or thinking of what to say, I felt brave and normal enough. But every time a silence came, the horror of my situation descended upon me like a heavy blanket filling my head, enveloping, smothering me, and making me afraid of death. But do you notice nothing about the way he answers your questions? No. Do you not see that every reply is in the negative? No matter what you ask him, he says no. That is true enough, I said, but I do not see where that leads me. Use your imagination. When I brought my whole attention back to old Mathers, I thought he was asleep. He sat over his teacup in a more stooped attitude as if he were a rock or part of a wooden chair he sat on, a man completely dead and turned to stone. Over his eyes the limp lids had drooped down, almost closing them. His right hand, rested on the table, lay lifeless and abandoned. I composed my thoughts and addressed him a sharp, noisy interrogation. "Will you answer a straight question?" I asked. He stirred somewhat, his lids opening slightly. "I will not," he replied. I saw that his answer was in keeping with Joe's shrewd suggestion. I sat thinking for a moment until I had thought the same thought inside out. "Will you refuse to answer a straight question?" I asked. "I will not," he replied. This answer pleased me. It meant that my mind had gotten to grips with his, that I was now almost arguing with him, and that we were behaving like two ordinary human beings. I did not understand all the terrible things which had happened to me, but I now began to think that I must be mistaken about them. "Very well," I said quietly. "Why do you always answer no?" He stirred perceptibly in the chair and filled the teacup up again before he spoke. He seemed to have some difficulty in finding words. "No is, generally speaking, a better answer than yes," he said at last. He seemed to speak eagerly, his words coming out as if they had been imprisoned in his mouth for 1,000 years. He seemed relieved that I had found a way to make him speak. I thought he even smiled slightly at me, but this was doubtless the trickery of the bad morning light or a mischief worked by the shadows of the lamp. He swallowed a long draught of tea and sat waiting, looking at me with his queer eyes. They were now bright and active, and moved about restlessly in their yellow, wrinkled sockets. "Do you refuse to tell me why you say that?" I asked. "No. When I was a young man I led an unsatisfactory life and devoted most of my time to excesses of one kind or another, my principal weakness being number one. I was always party to the formation of the artificial manure room." My mind went back at once to John Dibney, to the farm, and the public house, and from that the horrible afternoon we spent on the wet, lonely road. As if to interrupt my unhappy thoughts, I heard Joey's voice again, this time severe. "No need to ask him what number one is. We do not want lurid description of vice or anything at all in that line. Use your imagination. Ask him what all this has to do with yes and no." "What does that have to do with yes and no?" "After a time," said old Mathers, disregarding me, "I mercifully perceived the error of my ways, and the unhappy destination I would reach unless I mended them. I retired from the world in order to try to comprehend it, and to find out why it became more unsavory as the years accumulate on a man's body. What do you think I discovered at the end of my meditations?" I felt pleased again. He was now questioning me. "What?" "That no is a better word than yes." This seemed to leave us where we were, I thought. On the contrary, very far from it. I'm beginning to agree with him. There's a lot to be said for no as a general principle. Ask him what he means. "What do you mean?" "When I was meditating," said old Mathers, "I took all my sins out and put them on the table, so to speak, and I need not tell you it was a big table." He seemed to give a very dry smile at his own joke. I chuckled to encourage him. I gave them all strict examination, weighed them, and viewed them from all angles of the compass. I asked myself how I came to commit them, where I was, and whom I was with when I came to do them. This is very wholesome stuff. Every word is sermon in itself. Listen very carefully. Ask him to continue. Continue. I confess, I felt a click inside me very near my stomach, as if Joe had put a finger to his lip and pricked a pair of limp spaniel ears to make sure no syllable of this wisdom escaped him. Old Mathers continued talking quietly. I discovered, he said, that everything you do is in response to a request or suggestion made to you by some other party, either inside you or outside. Some of these suggestions are good and praiseworthy, and some of them are undoubtedly delightful. But the majority of them are definitely bad and are pretty considerable sins as sins go. You understand me? Perfectly. I would say that the bad ones outnumber the good ones by 3 to 1. 6 to 1, if you ask me. I therefore decided to say no henceforth to every suggestion, request, or inquiry, whether inward or outward. It was the only simple formula which was sure and safe. It was difficult to practice at first, and often called for heroism, but I persevered and hardly ever broke down completely. It is now many years since I said yes. I have refused more requests and negatived more statements than any man living or dead. I have rejected, reneged, disagreed, refused, and denied to an extent that is unbelievable. An excellent and original regime. This is all extremely interesting and salutary, every syllable a sermon in itself. Very, very wholesome. Extremely interesting, I said to old Mathers. The system leads to peace and contentment. People do not trouble you to ask questions if they know the answer is a foregone conclusion. Thoughts which have no chance of succeeding do not take the trouble to come into your head at all. You must find it irksome in some ways, I suggested. If, for instance, I were to offer you a glass of whiskey. Such few friends as I have, he answered, are usually good enough to arrange such invitations in a way that will enable me to adhere to my system and also accept the whiskey. More than once I have been asked whether I would refuse such things. And the answer is still no? Certainly. Joe said nothing at this stage, but I had the feeling that the confession was not to his liking. He seemed to be uneasy inside me. The old man seemed to get somewhat restive also. He bent over his teacup with abstraction, as if he were engaged in accomplishing a sacrament. Then he drank with his hollow throat, making empty noises. A saintly man. I turned to him again, fearing that his fit of talkativeness had passed. "Where is the black box which was under the floor a moment ago?" I asked, pointing to the opening in the corner. He shook his head and did not say anything. "Do you refuse to tell me?" "No." "Do you object to me taking it?" "No." "Then where is it?" "What is your name?" he asked sharply. I was surprised at this question. It had no bearing on my own conversation, but I did not notice its relevance because I was shocked to realize that, simple as it was, I could not answer it. I did not know my name. I did not remember who I was. I was not certain where I had come from, or what my business was in that room. I found I was sure of nothing save my search for the black box. But I knew that the other man's name was Mathers, and that he had been killed with a pump and a spade. I had no name. "I have no name," I replied. "Then how could I tell you where the box was if you could not sign a receipt? That'd be the most irregular. I might as well give the west wind or the smoke from a pipe. How could you execute an important bank document?" "I could always get a name. Doyle or Spaulding's a good name, and so is O'Sweeney and Hardiman and O'Gara. I can take my choice. I'm not tied down for life to one word like most people." "I do not care much for Doyle," he said absently. "The name is Ban, Singer Ban, the eminent tenor. 500,000 people crowded the great piazza when the great artist appeared on the balcony of St. Peter's, Rome." Fortunately, these remarks are not audible in the ordinary sense of the word. Old Mathers was eyeing me. "What is your color?" "My color? Surely you know you have a color. People often remark on my red face." "I do not mean that at all. Follow this closely. This is bound to be extremely interesting, very edifying also." I saw it was necessary to question old Mathers carefully. "Do you refuse to explain this question about the colors?" "No," he said. He slapped more tea in his cup. "No doubt you are aware that the winds have colors," Eli said. I thought he'd settled himself more restfully in his chair and changed his face till it looked a bit benign. "I never noticed it." A record of this belief will be found in the literature of all ancient peoples. There are 4 winds and 8 sub-winds, each with its own color. The wind from the east is a deep purple, from the south a fine shining silver. The north wind is a hard black, and the west is amber. People in the old days had the power to perceive these colors and could spend a day sitting quietly on the hillside, watching the beauty of the winds, their fall and rise in changing hues, the magic of neighboring winds when they were interweaved like ribbons at a wedding. It is a better occupation than gazing at newspapers. The sub winds had colors of indescribable delicacy, a reddish yellow half-way between silver and purple, a grayish green which related equally to black and brown. What could be more than exquisite than Guerra San Incondonte, Cesar Theories Exclusente, Special Element, uh, fuck if I know. I have no clue. Sorry guys, I'm not Irish. I do not know that. The countryside swept lightly by cool rain, reddened by the southwest breeze. It also happens to be it's to Selby. It's to Selby's remarks on the side. It's one of his side notes. A lot of those side notes are going to be like that. Um, I digress. Can you see these colors? I asked. No. You were asking me what my color was. How do people get their colors? A person's color is the color of the wind prevailing at his birth. What is your own color? Light yellow. And what is the point of knowing your color or having a color at all? For one thing, you can tell the length of your life from it. Yellow means a long life, and the lighter the better. This is very edifying. Every sentence is a sermon in itself. Ask him to explain. Please explain. It is a question of making little gowns, he said informatively. Little gowns? Yes, when I was born there were certain policemen present who had a gift of wind watching. The gift is getting very rare these days. Just after I was born, he went outside and examined the color of the wind that was blowing across the hill. He had a secret bag with him full of certain materials and bottles, and he had a tailor's instruments also. He was outside for about 10 minutes. When he came in again, he had a little gown in his hand, and he made my mother put it on me. Where did he get this gown? I asked in surprise. He made it himself, secretly in the backyard, very likely in the cow-house. It was very thin and slight, hiked the very finest of spider's muslin. You would not see it at all if you held it against the sky, but at certain angles of light you might at times accidentally notice the edge of it. It is the purest and most perfect manifestation of the outside skin of light yellow. This yellow was the color of my birth wind. I see, I said. A very beautiful conception. Every time my birthday came, old Mather said, I was presented with another little gown of the same identical quality, except that it was put on over the other one and not in place of it. You may appreciate the extreme delicacy and fineness of the material when I tell you that even at 5 years old and 5 of these gowns together on me, I still appeared to be naked. It was, however, an unusual yellowish sort of nakedness. Of course, there's no objection to wearing other clothes over the gown. I usually wore an overcoat, but every year I got a new gown. Where did you get them? From the police. They were brought to my own home until I was big enough to call to the barracks for them. And how does all this enable you to predict your span of life? I will tell you, no matter what your color is, it will be represented faithfully in your birth gown. With each year and each gown, the color will get deeper and more pronounced. In my own case, I attained a bright, full-blown yellow at 15, although colors were so light at birth it would be imperceptible. I am now nearing 70, and the color is a light brown. As my gowns come to me through the years ahead, color will deepen to dark brown, then to dull mahogany, and from that ultimately to the very dark sort of brownness one associates, usually with stout. Yes? In a word, the color gradually deepens gown by gown and year by year until it appears to be black. Finally, a day will come when the addition of one further gown will actually achieve real and full blackness. On that day, I will die. Joe and I were surprised at this. We pondered it in silence. Joe, I thought, seeking to reconcile what he had heard with certain principles he held respecting morality and religion. That means, I said at last, that if you get a number of these gowns and put them on all together, reckoning each as a year of life, you can ascertain the year of your death? Theoretically, yes, he replied. But there are two difficulties. First of all, the police refuse to let you have the gowns together on the ground that the general ascertainment of death days would be contrary to the public interest. They talk of breaches of the peace and so forth. Secondly, there is a difficulty about stretching. Stretching? Yes, see, since you will be wearing a grown man the tiny gown that fitted you when you were born, it's clear that the gown has stretched until it's perhaps 100 times as big as it originally was. Naturally, this will affect the color, making it as many times rarer than it was. Similarly, there will be a proportional stretch and corresponding diminution in color in all the gowns up to manhood, perhaps 20 or so in all. I wonder whether it can be taken this creation of gowns will become opaque at the instance of puberty. I reminded him that there was always an overcoat. I take it then, I said to old Mathers, that when you say you can tell the length of life, so to speak, from the color of your shirt, you mean that you can tell roughly whether you be long-lived or short-lived? Yes, but if you use your intelligence, you can make a very accurate forecast. Naturally, some colors are better than others. Some of them, like purple and maroon, are very bad and always mean an early grave. Pink, however, is excellent, and there is a lot to be said for certain shades of green and blue. Prevalence of such colors at birth, however, usually promote a wind that brings bad weather, thunder and lightning, perhaps, and there might be difficulties such as, for instance, getting a woman to come in time. As you know, most good things in life are associated with certain disadvantages. Really very beautiful, everything considered. Who are these policemen? I asked. There's Sergeant Pluck and another man called McCronsky, and there's a third man called Fox that disappeared 25 years ago and was never heard of after. The first two are down in the barracks, as far as I know, and have been there for hundreds of years. They must be operating on a very rare color, something that ordinary eyes cannot see at all. There's no white wind that I know of. They all have the gift of seeing the winds. A bright thought came to me when I heard of these policemen. If they knew so much, they would have no difficulty in telling me where I would find the black box. I began to think I would never be happy until I had that box again in my grip. I looked at old Mathers. He had relapsed again to his former passivity. The light had faded from his eyes, and the right hand resting on the table looked quite dead. Is the barracks far? I asked loudly. No. I made up my mind to go there with no delay. I noticed a very remarkable thing. The lamplight, which in the beginning had been shining forlornly in the old man's corner only, had now grown rich and yellow, flooded the entire room. The outside light of morning had faded away almost to nothingness. I glanced outside of the window and gave a start. Coming into the room, I had noticed that the window was to the east, and that the sun was rising in that quarter and firing the heavy clouds with light. Now it was setting the last glimmers of feeble red in exactly the same place. It had risen a bit, stopped, and then gone back. Night had come. Policemen would be in bed. I was sure I had fallen among strange people. I made up my mind to go to the barracks first thing on the morrow. Then I turned again to old Mathers. Would you object, I said to him, if I went upstairs and occupied one of your beds for the night? It's too late to go home, and I think it's going to rain in any case. No, he said. I left him bent and his teeth set and went upstairs. I had got to like him and thought it was a pity he had been murdered. I felt relieved and simplified and certain that I would soon have the black box. But I would not ask the policeman openly about it at first. I'd be crafty. In the morning I would go to the barracks and report the theft of my American gold watch. Perhaps it was this lie which was responsible for the bad things that happened to me afterwards. I had no American gold watch. 3. I crept out of old Mather's house 9 hours afterwards, making my way onto the firm high road under the first skies of morning. The dawn was contagious, spreading rapidly about the heavens. Birds were stirring, and the great kingly trees were being pleasingly interfered with by the first breezes. My heart was happy and full of zest for high adventure. I did not know my name or where it had come from, but the black box was practically in my grasp. The policeman would direct me where it was. £10,000 worth of negotiable securities would be a conservative estimate of what was in it. As I walked down the road, I was pleased enough with everything. The road was narrow, white, old, hard, scarred with shadow. It ran away westwards into the mist of the early morning, running cunningly through the little hills and going in some trouble to visit tiny towns which were not, strictly speaking, on its way. It was possibly one of the oldest roads in the world. I found it hard to think of a time when there was no road there because the trees and the tall hills and the fine views of Bogman had been arranged by wise hands for the pleasing picture they made when looked at from the road. Without a road to have them looked at from, they would have somewhat aimless, if not futile, aspect. The Selby has some interesting things to say on the subject of roads. Roads he regards as the most ancient of human monuments, surpassed by the tens of centuries, the oldest thing of stone that man has reared to mark his passing. The tread of time, he says, leveling all else, has beaten only to a more enduring hardness the pathways that have been made throughout the world. He mentions in passing a trick the Celts had in ancient times, that of throwing a calculation upon a road. In those days, wise men could tell to a nicety the dimension of a host which had passed by in the night by looking at the tracks with a certain eye, and judging them by their perfection and imperfection, the way each footfall was interfered with by each that came after. In this way they could tell the number of men who had passed, whether they were done with horse or heavy with shields and iron weapons, and how many chariots; thus they could say the number of men who would be sent after them to kill them. Elsewhere, de Selby makes the point that a good road would have a character and a certain air of destiny, in the indefinable intimation of its going somewhere, be it east or west, and not coming back from there. If you go with such a road, he thinks, it will give you a pleasant travelling, fine sights at every corner, and gentle ease of penetration that will persuade you that you are walking forever on falling ground. But if you go east on a road that is on its way west, you will marvel at the unfailing bleakness of every prospect, and the great number of sore-footed inclines that confront you to make you tired. If a friendly road should lead you into a complicated city with nets of crooked streets, and 500 other roads leaving it for unknown destinations, your own road will be indiscernibly for its own self, and will lead you safely out of the tangled town. I walked quietly for a good distance on this road, thinking my own thoughts with the front part of my brain, and at the same time taking pleasure with the back part in the great and widespread finery of the morning. The air was clean, clear, abundant, and intoxicating. Its powerful presence could be discerned everywhere, shaking up the green things jauntily, conferring greater dignity and definition on the stones and boulders, forever arranging and rearranging the clouds and breathing life into the world. The sun had climbed steeply out of his hiding, and was now standing benignly in the lower sky, pouring down floods of enchanting light and preliminary tinglings of heat. I came upon a stone stile beside a gate leading into a field, and sat down to rest upon the top of it. I was not sitting there long until I became surprised. Surprising ideas were coming to my head from nowhere, and I remembered who I was, not my name, but where I had come from, and who my friends were. I recalled John Dibney, my life with him, and how we came to wait under the dripping trees on the winter's evening. This led me to reflect and wonder that there was nothing wintry about the morning in which I was now sitting. Furthermore, there was nothing familiar about the good-looking countryside which stretched away from me at every view. I was now but 2 days from home, not more than 3 hours walking, and yet I seemed to have reached regions which I had never seen before, and of which I had never even heard. I could not understand this, because although my life had been spent mostly among my books and papers, I had thought that there was no road in the district I had not travelled, no road whose destination was not well known to me. There was another thing. My surroundings had strangeness of a peculiar kind, entirely separate from mere strangeness of a country where one has never been before. Everything seemed almost too pleasant, too perfect, too finely made. Each thing that eye could see was unmistakable and unambiguous, incapable of merging with any other thing, or of being confused with it. The color of the bogs were beautiful, and the greatness of the green fields supernal. Trees were arranged here, and they were far from a usual consideration from the fastidious eye. The senses took keen pleasure from merely breathing the air and discharging their functions with delight. I was clearly in a strange country, but all the doubts and perplexities which strewed my mind would not stop me from feeling happy and heart light, and full of an appetite for going about my business and finding the hiding place of the black box. The valuable contents of it, I felt, would secure me for life in my own house, and afterwards I could revisit the mysterious townland upon my bicycle, and probe at my leisure the reasons for all its strangeness. I got down from the stile and continued my walk along the road. It was pleasant, easeful walking. I felt sure I was not going against the road. It was, so to speak, accompanying me. Before going to sleep the previous night, I had spent a long time in puzzled thought, and also in carrying on inward conversations with my newly found soul. Strangely enough, I was not thinking about the baffling fact that I was enjoying the hospitality of the man I had murdered, or whom I was sure I had murdered, with my spade. I was reflecting about my name, and how tantalizing it was to have forgotten it. All people have names of one kind or another. Some are arbitrary labels related to the appearance of the person. Some represent purely genealogical associations, but most of them afford some clue to the appearance of the person's name, and confer a certain advantage in the execution of legal documents. Even a dog has a name which dissociates him from other dogs, and indeed my own soul, whom nobody has ever seen on the road or standing at the counter of a public house, had apparently no difficulty in assuming a name which distinguished him from other people's souls. Thing not easy to account for is the unconcern which I turned over my various perplexities in my mind. Blank anonymity coming suddenly in the middle of life should be at best alarming, a sharp symptom that mind is in decay. But the unexplainable exhilaration which I drew from my surroundings seemed to invest the situation merely with the genial interest of a good joke. Even now, as I walked along contentedly, I sensed a solemn question on the subject from within, one similar to many that had been asked the night before. It was a mocking inquiry. I light-heartedly gave a list of names which, for all I knew, I might hear: Hugh Murray, Constantine Petrie, Peter Small, Signor Benjamin Bury, the Honorable Alex Brannigan, Bart Kurt Fruden, Mr. John P. de Salis, M.A., Dr. Solway Gar, Bonaparte Goswar, Legs O'Hannigan. Signor Benjamin Bari, Joe said, the eminent tenor. 3 baton charges outside the Scala at Great Tenor's premiere. Extraordinary scenes were witnessed outside the Scala Opera House when a crowd of some 10,000 devotees, incensed by the management's statement that no more standing room was available, attempted to rush the barriers. Thousands were injured, 79 fatally, in the wild melee. Constable Peter Contis sustained injuries to the groin from which he was unlikely to recover. These scenes were comparable only to the delirium of a fashionable audience inside after Signor Barry had concluded his recital. The great tenor was an admirable voice. Starting with a phase in the lower register with a husky richness which seemed to suggest a cold, he delivered the immortal strains of Che Goletta Menina, favorite aria of beloved Caruso. As he warmed to his godlike task, note after gold note spilled forth to the remotest corner of the vast theatre, filling all and sundry to its inner core. When he reached the high C, where heaven and earth seemed marred in one great climax of exaltation, the audience arose in their seats and cheered as one man, showering hats, programs, and chocolate boxes on the great artist. Thank you very much, I murmured, smiled in wide amusement. A bit overdone, perhaps, but it's only a hint of pretensions and vanity that you inwardly permit yourself. Indeed? Or what about Dr. Solway Gar? The Duchess has fainted. Is there a doctor in the audience? The spare figure, thin, nervous fingers, and iron gray hair, making its way quietly to the pale, excited onlookers. The Jew breathed commands, quietly spoken but imperious. Besides 5 minutes, the situation is well in hand. Wan but smiling, the Duchess murmurs her thanks. Expert diagnosis averted still another tragedy. A small denture has been extracted from the thorax. All hearts go out to quiet-spoken servant of humanity, His Grace, summoned too late to see aught but the happy ending, is opening his cheque-book and has already marked 1,000 guineas on the counterfoil of a small token of his esteem. His cheque is taken but torn to atoms by the smiling medico. A lady in blue at the back of the hall begins to sing O Peace Be Thine, and the anthem, growing in volume and sincerity, peals out into the quiet night, leaving few eyes that are dry and hearts that are not replete with yearning ere the last notes fade. Dr. Gar only smiles, shaking his head in deprecation. I think that is quite enough, I said. I walked on unperturbed. The sun was maturing rapidly in the east, and great heat had started to spread about the ground like a magic influence, making everything, including my own self, very beautiful and happy in a dreamy, drowsy way. The little beds of tender grass here and there by the roadside and dry sheltery ditches began to look seductively and inviting. The road was being slowly baked to a greater hardness, making my walking more and more laborious. After not long, I decided that I must now be near police barracks and that another rest would fit me better for the task I had on hand. I stopped walking and spread my body out evenly in the shelter of the ditch. The day was brand new and the ditch was feathery. I lay back unstintingly, stunned with the sun. I felt a million little influences in my nostril. Hay smells, grass smells, odors from distant flowers, the reassuring unmistakability of the abiding earth beneath my head. It is a new and bright day, the day of the world. Birds piping with limitation, and incomparable stripe-colored bees passed above me on their missions and hardly ever came back the same way home. My eyes were shuttered, and my head was buzzing with the spinning of the universe. I was not long lying there until my wits deserted me, and I fell far into my sleep. I slept there for a long time, as motionless and devoid of feeling as the shadow of myself was slept behind me. When I woke again, it was later in the day, and a small man was sitting beside me, watching me. He was tricky, and smoked a tricky pipe, and his hand was quavery. His eyes were tricky also, probably from watching policemen. They were very unusual eyes. There was no palpable divergence in their alignment, they seemed to be incapable of giving a direct glance of anything that was straight, whether or not the curious incompatibility were suitable for looking at crooked things. I knew he was watching me only by the way his head was turned. I could not meet his eyes or challenge them. He was small and poorly dressed, and on his head was a cloth cap of pale silent color. He kept his head in my direction without speaking, and I found his presence disquieting. Wonder how long he'd been watching me before I woke. Watch your step here, a very slippery looking customer. I put my hand in my pocket to see if my wallet was there. It was, smooth and warm like the hand of a good friend. When I found that I had not been robbed, I decided to talk to him genially and civilly, see who he was, and ask him to direct me to the barracks. I made up my mind not to despise the assistance of anyone who could help me, in however small a way, to find the black box. I gave him the time of day, and so far as I could, as a look as intricate as he could give himself. More luck to you, I said. More power to yourself, he said dourly. Ask him his name and occupation and inquire what is his destination. I did not desire to be inquisitive, sir, but would it be true to mention that you're a bird catcher? Not a bird catcher. A tinkerer? Not that. A man on a journey? No, not that. A fiddler? Not that one. I smiled at him in good-humored perplexity and said, Tricky-looking man, you are hard to place, and it is not easy to guess your station. You seem very contented in one way, but then again you do not seem to be satisfied. What is your objection to life? He blew little bags of smoke at me and looked at me closely from behind the bushes of hair which were growing about his eyes. Is it life? I'd rather be without it, for there is a queer small utility in it. You cannot eat it or drink it or smoke it in your pipe. It does not keep the rain out, and is a poor armful in the dark if you strip it and take it to bed with you after a night of porter when you are shivering with the red passion. It is a great mistake, and the thing better done without, like bed jars and foreign bacon. That's a nice way to be talking on a grand lively day, I chided, when the sun is ruining the sky and sending great tidings in our weary bones. Or like feather beds, or bread manufactured with powerful steam machinery. Is it life, you say? Life? Explain the difficulty of life, yet stressing its essential sweetness and desirability. What sweetness? Flowers in the spring, the glory and fulfillment of human life, birdsong at evening. You know very well what I mean. I am not so sure about sweetness all the same. It is hard to get the right shape of it, I said to the tricky man, or define life at all. But if you identify life with enjoyment, I am told there's a better brand of it in the cities than the country parts, and there is said to be a very superior brand of it had in certain parts of France. Did you ever notice that cats have a lot of it in them when they are quite juveniles? He was looking in my direction crossly. Is it life? Many a man has spent 100 years trying to get the dimensions of it, and when he understands it at last, it entertains a certain part in his head. By the hokey he takes it to his bed and dies. He dies like a poisoned sheepdog. There's nothing so dangerous you can't smoke it. Nobody will give you tuppence halfpenny for half of it, and it kills you in the wind-up. It's a queer contraption, very dangerous, a certain death trap. Life. He sat there looking very vexed with himself and staying for a while without talking behind a little grey wall he had built for himself by means of his pipe. After an interval I made another attempt to find out what his business was. Or a man out after rabbits? Not that, not that. A traveling man with a job of journey work? No. Driving a steam threshing mill? Not for certain. Tin plates? No. Town clerk? No. Waterworks inspector? No. With pills for 6 horses? Not with pills. Then my dad, I remarked perplexedly, your calling is very unusual, and I cannot think of what it is at all, unless you are a farmer like myself, or a publican's assistant, or possibly something in the drapery line. Are you an actor or a mummer? Not them either. He sat up suddenly and looked at me in a manner that was almost direct, his pipe sticking out aggressively from his tight jaws. Pye had the world full of smoke. I was uneasy, but not altogether afraid of him. If I had my spade with me, I knew I would soon make short work of him. I thought the wisest thing to do was to humor him and to agree with everything he said. I'm a robber, he said in a dark voice, a robber with a knife and an arm that's as strong as an article of powerful steam machinery. A robber? I exclaimed. My forebodings had been borne out. Steady here. Take no chances. Strong as the bright moving instruments in a laundry. A black murderer also. Every time I rob a man I knock him dead because I have no respect for life. Not a little. If I kill enough men there'll be more life to go round, and maybe then I'll be able to live till I'm 1,000 and not have the old rattle in my neck when I'm quite 70. Have you a money bag with you? plead poverty and destitution, ask for loan of money. That will not be difficult, I answered. I have no money at all, or coins, or sovereigns, or banker's drafts. No pawnmaster's tickets, nothing is negotiable or of any value. I'm as poor as man as yourself, and was thinking of asking you for 2 shillings to help me on my way. I was now more nervous than I was before as I sat looking at him. He had put his pipe away and had produced the long farmer's knife. He was looking at the blade of it and flashing lights with it. Even if you have no money, I'll take your little life. Now look here, till I tell you, I rejoined in a stern voice, robbery and murder are against the law, and furthermore my life will add little to your own, because I have disorder in my chest, and I am sure to be dead in 6 months. As well as that, there's a question of dark funeral in my teacup on Tuesday. Wait till you hear a cough. I forced out a great hacking cough. It traveled like a breeze across the grass near at hand. I was now thinking that it might be wise to jump up quickly and run away. It would at least be a simple remedy. There's another thing about me, I added. Part of me is made of wood and has no life in it at all. Tricky Man gave out sharp cries of surprise, jumped up, and gave me looks that were too tricky for description. I smiled at him, pulled up my left trouser leg to show him my timber shin. He examined it closely and ran his hard finger along the edge of it. Then he sat down very quickly, put his knife away, and took out his pipe again. It had been burning away all the time in his pocket, because he started to smoke it without any delay, and after a minute he had so much blue smoke made, and gray smoke, that I thought his clothes had gone on fire. Between the smoke I could see that he was giving friendly looks in my direction. After a few moments he spoke cordially and softly to me. I would not hurt you, little man, he said. I think I got the disorder in Mungalar, I explained. I knew that I had gained his confidence and that the danger of violence was now past. He then did something which took me by surprise. Pulled up his own ragged trouser and showed me his own left leg. It was smooth, shapely, and fairly fat, but it was made of wood also. That's a funny coincidence, I said. I now perceive the reason for his sudden change of attitude. You're a sweet man, and I would not lay a finger on your personality. I am the captain of all the one-legged men in the country. I knew them all up to now except one, your own self, and that one is now also my friend in the same bargain. If any man looks at you sideways, I'll rip his belly. That is very friendly talk. Wide open, he said, making a wide movement with his hands. If you're ever troubled, send for me, and I'll save you from the woman. Women I have no interest in at all, I said, smiling. A fiddle is a better thing for diversion. It does not matter. If your perplexity is an army or a dog, I'll come with all the one-legged men and rip the bellies. My real name is Martin Fimmikin. It's a reasonable name, I assented. Martin Fimmikin, he repeated, listening to his own voice as if he was listening to the sweetest music in the world. He lay back and filled himself up to the ears with dark smoke, and then he nearly burst blooded out again and hid himself in it. Tell me this. Have you a desideratum? This queer question was unexpected, but I answered it quickly enough. I said I had. What desideratum? To find what I'm looking for. That is a handsome desideratum. What way will you bring it about or mature its pseudonym and bring it ultimately to passable factivity? Martin Finnegan said. By visiting the police barracks and asking the policeman to direct me where it is. Maybe you might instruct me on how to get to the barrack from where we are now. Maybe indeed. Have you an ultimatum? I have a secret ultimatum. I am sure it is a fine ultimatum, but I will not ask you to recite it for me if you think it's a secret one. He had smoked away all his tobacco and was now smoking the pipe itself, judging by the smell of it. He put his hand in his pocket of his crotch and took a round thing. Here's a sovereign for your good luck, a good golden token of your golden destiny. I gave him, so to speak, my golden thank you, but I noticed that the coin he gave me was a bright penny. I put it carefully in my pocket as if it were highly prized and very valuable. I was pleased with the way I handled this eccentrically queer-spoken brother of the wooden leg. Near the far side of the road was a small river. I stood up and looked at it and watched the white water. I tumbled in the stony bedstead and jumped in the air, hurriedly, excitedly around a corner. The barracks are on the same road, said Martin Finnecane, and I left it behind me a mile away this today morning. You will discover it at the place where the river runs away from the road. If you look now, you will see the fat trout in their brown coats coming back from the barracks at this hour because they go there every morning for the fine breakfast that it has to be had from the slops and thrones of the 2 policemen. But they have their dinners down the other way where the man called Macpherson has a baker's shop in the village houses with their rears to the water. 3 bed vans he has and light dog cart for the high mountain, and he sends at Kalkashim on Mondays and Wednesdays. Martin Finnecane, I said, 102 difficult thoughts I had to think between this and my destination, and the sooner the better. He sent me up friendly glances from the smoky ditch. Good looking man. Good luck to your luck, and do not entertain danger without sending me cognizance. I said goodbye, goodbye, and left him after a handshake. I looked back down from the road and saw nothing but the lip of the ditch with smoke coming from it as if tinkerers were at the bottom of it cooking their what they had. Before it was gone, I looked back again and saw the shape of his old head regarding me and closely studying my disappearance. He was amusing and interesting and had helped me by directing me to the barracks and telling me how far it was. And as I went upon my way, I was slightly glad that I had met him, a droll customer. And so our nameless killer steps into the absurd unknown, where bicycles might just be the key to everything or nothing. O'Brien's wit cuts like a knife, but the real horror, eternity's loop, where mistakes repeat forever. Stay tuned for more madness, if you can handle the ride.